Are we speaking in code in these last days, just like they did in the early church, to avoid persecution? Okay, welcome to the last dispensation. You're living in it. I'm your host, Troy. Remember, do not forget to subscribe to this channel, hit the bell for notifications, like this video, share this video, and comment, even if you just say hi. But seriously, folks, share this video. All right. Why was the book of Revelation written symbolically? Speaking in code in these last days. So there are two different opinions on this that I'm going to delve into. What you see here in baby blue are my words, and the other words belong to someone else. So I responded to a lot of what he said. He didn't believe that, and a lot of people don't believe that apocalyptic style. They call it apocalyptic style, going not just John the Revelator, but Ezekiel, Daniel. We could go all the way back to 600 BC, and even further back. Revelation was given in symbols. But could that also have been a way to escape persecution as well? So why was the book of Revelation written symbolically, speaking in code in these last days, just like we do on YouTube? Some argue for the reason of Roman persecution. Others say not at all. I say some things myself. A common view among Christians generally is that John wrote the book of Revelation in symbols as a kind of code. The church was experiencing persecution, and John wanted to write critically of Rome in such a way that the recipients of his book would not get in trouble for harboring such an inflammatory document. He wrote in symbols so that any non-initiated Roman would fail to understand what he was reading, and thus the church would be spared further persecution. By the way, I will be leaving the links to all of these sources, even this source right here, who I did not fail to mention them. I did not mention them for a reason. He says, I taught a class on Revelation tonight in a church. This is a Christian person. This is not a member of the church. He says, and this idea came up. The idea itself is wrong, and I said so during class. But following class, I reflected on the idea a little more and eventually determined 5 reasons against it. I thought I would list them here. So he does, and I list the opposite of it, just to get us thinking. I'm not saying that apocalyptic style was definitely a way to avoid persecution. But I digress. Let's get into this. Number 1, he says there is no evidence that the Romans attempted to censor Christian literature in this way. I say, well, there kind of is, and we will mention it later. Okay, and we will. Number 2, it would take a pretty ignorant Roman censor to fail to notice that the harlot riding the beast in chapter 17, the beast with 7 heads, which are 7 mountains, that's chapter 17, verse 9, and the harlot that is the great city, chapter 17, verse 18 in Revelation, represents Rome. I say no, but they couldn't persecute the writer because there was no proof. There was no proof. They couldn't prove that was Rome. And then I go on to say Romans still followed the laws they set in place. They couldn't just persecute you or throw you in jail just because they thought something. They thought it was an interpretation of Rome. Just like YouTube isn't stupid, They can pick up on sarcasm, and influencers such as J.P. Sears and others who intentionally speak in code. They can't do much about it, though, because there are no community standard rules broken. So, in other words, you can use sarcasm. You can say things, like when I say Dorf chloros, you guys know who I'm talking about. Or when we say, I'm not going to say that one because it's not very, the Let's Go Brandon thing, but that's not a good thing to say. But that's code. People are using that today. Why are we using that? Because of censorship. We're using these things. Like when we would say, anyway, you get the idea, right? We're doing that today, just like they did in the early church. Okay, number 3, he says Christians did not shrink from directly challenging Roman authority by doing exactly what John wanted them to do, refusing to participate in Roman religion. This often resulted in martyrdom for Christians, which they welcomed. They did not flee from it, speaking of martyrdom. Moreover, Christians knew how to directly insult the powers that be in their literature. They also weren't trying to get persecuted and martyred either. And I say, well, it was most likely avoided at all costs for innocent women and children to be exploited, tortured, and killed. Remember, it wasn't the majority of Christians that were martyred during the first century, and it wasn't. The majority of Christians were martyred in the 3rd century. So I go on to say preservation was paramount for Christianity. They didn't want to be martyred. They tried to avoid it. Yes, Christians were persecuted, but in the 1st century, most persecution was local and sporadic. Paul did teach that Christians should expect to suffer, but some had to last to continue the cause. They had to last. They had to have successors and spread the gospel of Jesus Christ, right? So they did do things probably like speak in code or use symbols in their writings. John was sending out stuff from the island of Patmos so that he could, maybe it wasn't his time to die. Well, it wasn't because he's still alive. We know that through the prophet Joseph Smith. Not until the 3rd century were millions of Jews martyred, Jewish Christians. All right, number 4, he says Revelation is written in symbols because it is apocalyptic literature. That is how apocalyptic literature works. And there are plenty of other examples to bear out this point. If Revelation were the only example of this type of literature, then we might have to devise an explanation for all the symbols. But it is in fact not unique in this aspect. And it would be foolish to argue that all apocalypses were written as such in order to avoid punishment for their readers. I say apocalyptic literature was for many reasons. And that's what I believe. I believe it was revelation that the Lord was using symbolically so that he can be more express in what he had to say to the children to his children on earth. It goes back to even Daniel, 600 BCE, when he interpreted Nebuchadnezzar's dream. So you argue that Daniel didn't have to hide this dream for his life, to preserve his life. Of course he did. From the false prophets, otherwise he could die if they were to interpret it. Remember? That was the whole point. He was to save his life. So he interpreted Nebuchadnezzar's dream. And it was symbolic. And that was so the other whoever they were, I don't know, I want to call them magi, but they were the king's sorcerers and spiritual advisors. They couldn't interpret the dream. And if it wasn't symbolic, they would have. So that was apocalyptic style, yet it was used to saved Daniel's life. So I believe that symbols in dreams and revelation in the scriptures can be used for more than one reason. The symbols are essential to the message that Revelation wants to convey. True. It is not as if John wanted to communicate a message to the churches and then decided to do so symbolically. No, the symbols are integral to the message. John wants to reform our minds to transform the way we see reality. He cannot accomplish this conversion of the imagination, to borrow a phrase from Richard Hayes, without the powerful and unrelenting symbols. I say, can't these symbols have more than one reason the Lord used them, like I just said earlier? Think of YouTube for a moment and other social media outlets, how we are using symbols today. So he says, those are the arguments that popped into my head. Of course, none of these are original with me, but I thought it would be helpful to me more than anyone to gather these thoughts in one place. Let me know if you have more to add to this list, and I will leave his link. Symbols in Revelation. I was going to read this one, but I would rather read this one, but I'll still leave the link to that one. Interpreting the symbolism in the book of Revelation. But before I do that, have you heard of the Uyghurs in China that are being persecuted? Hackers linked to the Chinese government have been spying on the Uyghur Muslims in China since 2013 by hacking cell phone apps, according to research from cybersecurity company Lockout. Lockout's research found that legitimate Android apps such as religious Quran text apps used by Uyghur Muslims were hacked to include malicious code. Lookout security intelligence engineer Apurva Kumar told the Daily Caller News Foundation in an email. So what's going on is this group of Muslims in China are being persecuted by the government for worshiping the way they do because they are Muslim. Now, what they do is interesting. They use symbols to communicate now. They use emojis. And what they'll do is, like this woman here, let's say, so what they're doing is they're splitting their families up, the Chinese government, and they're putting some in these camps, these re-education camps. And these Uyghurs will have, so they're not caught, they will have emojis, like if they had 5 members of their family, you would see 5 little emojis, like a little girl emoji and a husband and wife emoji, 3 children and 2 parents. And then down below, you see the woman crying and she's alone, which means that her husband and children were taken from her. This was a way to convey, and they still do it today, without the government catching on to it. So, yes, when people are persecuted, that is proof that they use code. And I believed that a lot of the apocalyptic style was not just to convey, like he says up here, that the symbols are essential to the message that Revelation wants to convey. That the symbols are integral to the message. That's true, but I believe that they can be used for more than one reason, and that is to avoid persecution. And also, like we say things on social media that we don't want to be censored, so we'll use different words and different codes and symbols to represent what we're trying to say. So it's happening today. It may not be with the government, but then again, who's running the media? Who's running the government these days? It's big corporation owners and special interest groups. that have a lot of money. Anyway, see, I'm afraid of being censored. Okay, so I want to read this right here. Interpreting the symbolism in the book of Revelation. Once again, not a member of the church, but this is very intense and awesome. And this is not about escaping persecution through symbolism, but it is about apocalyptic style. The book of Revelation is a tough book to read. It is full of strange and often scary imagery, confusing numbers, time references, and much more. However, with just a few tips for understanding certain confusing elements, the book opens up as an important and helpful book for Christians. The book is visual prophecy. One of the first things that help us understand the book is understanding what kind of book it is. John tells us in the opening chapter that what he has written is a prophecy from Jesus. Blessed is the one who reads aloud the words of this prophecy, and blessed are those who hear and who keep what is written in it, for the time is near. Revelation 1:3. 2. This prophecy was given to John in a series of visions. I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day, and I heard behind me a loud voice like a trumpet saying, "Write what you see." Revelation chapter 1, verses 10 through 11. The fact that John was in the Spirit and that God says to him to write what you see both point to the fact that what John is writing is direct revelation from God communicated through visions, making the book visionary prophecy, Revelation chapter 22, verse 16. As with the other visions, like Joseph's dream, for instance, Genesis chapter 37, verses 1 through 11, much of what John sees is strange and needs interpretation. I seriously believe that the Lord just doesn't give symbolism to be more profound and expressive, but it is for the wicked to not decipher, and they are to be discerned spiritually, which, if you think about it, is a way to avoid persecution as well. So the interpretations of things that are strange, like the woman in labor, the growing pains of the woman in labor, meaning growing close to the second coming. The church is described as a woman in the wilderness. The dragon is Lucifer, things like that. Revelation is full of symbolism. Because Revelation is a vision, it is full of symbolism. Revelation often has references to symbolism from other prophecies and visions, like the visions of Daniel, Ezekiel, and Zechariah. Some things in the visions are symbolic and interpreted with the vision, such as the lampstands representing the churches, Revelation chapter 1, verse 20. Other things in the vision are simply accessories, like in a dream. To understand what is symbolic and what isn't, a good rule of thumb is looking for what the thing does within the vision. If the thing accomplishes something, it usually symbolizes something that relates to real life. Sometimes the text interprets the symbolism for you. Almost always, the Lord gives an interpretation for the vision. And sometimes the symbolism relates to something from the Old Testament, but most of the characters described in Revelation are doing something. That way you know they are important. 4, numbers are symbolic. Numbers in Revelation are flexible and symbolic. For instance, the number 7 represents wholeness and completeness and divinity. It is God's perfect number. For example, the opening benediction says, "Grace to you and peace from him who is and who was and who is coming, and from the 7 spirits who are before his throne, and from Jesus Christ." Revelation chapter 1, verse 4 through 5. Hence 666. 666 or 616 is another one. Those are all Roman code, and it goes back to the Roman days where 7 was complete, 6 was less than 7, which meant less than divine or mankind. Think about it. The number 7 here symbolizes the Holy Spirit's wholeness and completeness and is a reference to Zechariah chapter 4, verse 10. Later in Revelation, John will refer to the Holy Spirit in the singular. Revelation chapter 1, verse 10, chapter 2, verse 7, chapter 11, and Is that chapter 11? Yeah. And chapter 17. Similarly, the number 12 and anything divisible by 12 is the number of the people of God. Revelation chapter 7, 1 through 12. 12 has always been an important number in the Bible because there were 12 tribes of Israel and 12 apostles. Multiples of 10 are used to represent an indefinite yet large number of whatever is described. Time is flexible and fluid. Because it is a vision, time is fluid, not strictly chronological. Like in a dream, time doesn't work the same way as in the real world. Revelation is a visual picture of things, some of which are past, some of which are present, and some of which are future. Revelation is primarily a visual representation, making it more like scenes that switch around to different times to show different things rather than showing one long chronological story. Number 6, one event is often portrayed from multiple angles. Okay, back to number 5. I think that's why a lot of the vision jumps around, because it's not given chronologically. Number 6, one event is often portrayed from multiple angles. The book of Revelation is a series of visions, but not every vision represents the same thing, nor are they in any strict chronological order. In fact, there is actually a lot of repetition in the book that operates like different chapters of a book or scenes of a movie. One chapter may talk about an event from the perspective of one or two characters, and another chapter will discuss the same event but from a different perspective or angle, or talk about different parts of the event. With these tips for understanding some of the more difficult elements of the book, Revelation opens up more easily. Jesus' last prophecy to his church before the final judgment is his last word to us. This is found in Revelation. I always say that with an S, I know. Chapter 22, verses 16 through 17. I, Jesus, have sent my angel to testify to you about these things for the churches. I am the root and the descendant of David, the bright morning star. The Spirit and the bride say, come. And let the one who hears say, come. And let the one who is thirsty come. Let the one who desires take the water of life without price. We don't have to give up on the book. Speaking of Revelation, the Lord has given us everything we need to understand it, because it is for us and for our encouragement and for our wisdom and endurance. Almost sounds like a member of the church. So here's the deal. I'm going to leave that link and the other links. And one more that I'm going to leave a link that I didn't read is Understanding Images and Symbols in the Book of Revelation. And that is by Richard Draper, and I've done stuff on him before. You got to go to BYU Religious Studies Center and read this. It's amazing. The nature of apocalyptic style, the vision given in code, the great enemies of the last days, the mark of the beast, etc. Anyway, thank you so much, and that's it.